Let's go ahead and finally bring on the man of the hour. All right. A returning 5-time, now 6-time champ. Ladies and gents, let's go and welcome Warren Evans, a.k.a. Bart of Darkness to the show. What up, Warren?
Wow. Wow, man.
They love you, man.
Oh, my God. I'm Stop. Oh, come on. Hey. Wow. Am I good to talk now, Butter?
I mean, I just welcome you on.
Okay. You know, I'm just making sure. I mean,
make yourself at home because I mean, you've done it for the last 5-6 times.
Seriously, you know, as hard as it was to sit here and say nothing during that intro, I'm flattered by all the nice things that you said. I'm flattered that not only that you are having me on to talk about the book, but that you enjoyed the book. And I think thanks for just, you know, thanks for sharing the love. I mean, I know I forced you to do it, but thanks anyway.
Would you have continued to be my friend had I not had you on the podcast to promote the book? Would you have felt the way? I felt like you would.
I think we would have still said what's up to each other, like, you know, in the coffee shop, but I don't know if we would have. It would have been a very like, oh, hey man, how you been? All right, see you later kind of thing. Whereas, you know, since we're doing the episode, since you're holding up the contract, you know, I think we're going to be closer for a lot longer.
Oh, that means a lot. Warren, speaking about coffee real quick, do you mind if I take a sip of of today's drink?
Butter, please. And what you're drinking, for anyone listening, is a Kiaguthu Peaberry from Kenya. Wow. And that is by Brandywine Coffee Roasters, who actually sponsor my podcast. So I guess by proxy, they sort of sponsor me, so they sort of, you know, sponsor this. So
this episode is brought to you by a lot of things today. Collecting the Simpsons, a hardcover book, and Brandywine coffee.
It's true, but all joking aside, like, this is really good coffee. We made some before the episode. And if you like coffee and you're interested in that sort of thing, go to my Instagram. If you don't already follow me, go to my bio and type in Darkness on their website. Get 10% off. Get you some coffee for a deal. We all love deals this time of year. It's the time of deals. Season of deals.
And you know, one thing I love more than anything is a good shameless plug. A shameless plug at that'll benefit the listeners, right? Like, you're coming through. The coffee is fantastic, all right? Jokes aside, my man Warren came an hour before we hit record. And then another 2 hours for technical difficulties and setup. But he came an hour before we were supposed to record, gave me one of the most thorough, in-depth coffee brewing experiences ever. Man was out here like professional barista.
Well, you know, this is what we do, man. So, you know, not to hijack anything, because we're going to talk about all kinds of things today, but this is a sort of a reunion of sorts, if you think about it, because, you know, we joke about me being on, you know, 5-6 times. I don't know how many times, honestly. Maybe it is more than, maybe it's 5, maybe it's more than 5.
I've got them all down here. Okay. I've got it all listed.
Okay, so there you go. However many times. But Botter also has been on my show. We had like a sort of like sub show that we did for a little while. And so this is a Pod Boys reunion. So like real heads, you know, people that have listened to Simpsons is Greater Than and Shortbox for a while. This is like, you know, this is sort of like some special content for them, possibly.
You're right.
And I think we need to acknowledge that.
You're right. I mean, there's no one right now, like, for the love of God, are they ever going to talk about the show? All right. Are they going to continue self-patting themselves on the back? No, we still got another 5 minutes. Warren, I wanted to ask really quick. Do you recall, do you recall all of your appearances? This makes, like, seriously, the 5th, if not 6th.
I do. Well,
you've been a fucking staple, a thorn in my side since 2019.
I honestly, I do believe that I do. Tell me if I'm correct.
All right, hit it.
So you had me on to talk just about my collection.
Yep, your first appearance.
That was the first time.
Episode 259, August 2019.
Okay.
All right.
Then we talked about Joker. Was the no Star Wars.
Oh my God, I didn't even count the Star Wars episodes.
See, we talked about Star Wars.
Oh damn. Okay.
We talked about Joker.
That's right.
We talked about Radioactive Man.
Okay, that was episode 344, December 2021.
There you go. We talked about.
Come on.
Oh my God.
You got 2 more.
Oh my God. See, I was thinking of. I was deeper in the cut than you. I was remembering episodes that you forgot. So you're gonna have to tell me the other ones.
This is why we need a short box historian, right? Because clearly I've been doing this too long. I forgot all the good stuff. All right, just to get through this really quick. So yes, your first episode was back in August 2019. That was episode 259. And then we did a special bonus episode where you came on the podcast before you launched your own podcast.
That's right.
August 2020.
That's right.
And if you want to get a little technical, we then dropped your pilot episode on our feed.
That is true.
All right. And then obviously you came back on to talk Radioactive Man in episode 344. I had you on as a guest co-host of me and Ed when we talked about like some comic book news last year. That was episode 365. And most recently, you were on the podcast this year. You were on the podcast this year with me and Blythe. We did the Ant-Man and Wasp movie review.
That's right. See, look, Botter likes to make it seem like I cram my way in here, but in reality,
I need you.
If you listen to that list, it sounds like I was just coming in clutch on most of those occasions.
You were. So, welcome back, man.
Dude, it's great to be back.
Yeah, and I thank you so much for sitting for 2 hours as I, fucked around with all this technical difficulty.
I wouldn't change anything about you, Botter. I love your dedication to making this podcast sound good. It's honestly, it's a nice thing to see.
All right, before we get to talking about the book, because we have the book front and center.
Yes.
Amazing book so far. We're going to really get into it. We're going to flip through some pages and all the bookmarks I've got. But I've got to ask, how is the podcast doing? How is Simpsons Greater Than doing?
It's been a really interesting year for the podcast because, I think when you start a podcast like I did as a response to, the pandemic and spending a lot more time at home, and you're like, I need a way to kill some time. So I'm going to start this podcast, and I'm going to use it as an excuse to like further what I do, to meet more people from the show. I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. Eventually, as life got a little more normal, time got a little thinner, projects got a little more, and the book is a big reason for that, why the show slowed down a little bit. But what ended up happening is, while this is the least amount of stuff I've put out for the podcast in a year, the response and the amount of people that have found it this year has been like, the biggest growth the show has had. And it's sort of reinvigorated my interest in the podcast. And people who listen, they know that now I have a co-host, my friend Brandon.
Big shout out to Brandon.
Viral sensation Brandon. He created the little Simpsons TV that you've DM'd all your friends a million times. And he's the co-host now. So the show is like moving in an interesting direction, but it's doing well.
Good stuff. You guys, just hit, what number are you guys on? What's that milestone episode?
We are almost to, I think we're to episode 80.
Oh, wow.
Something like that. Yeah. So time's moving
big one.
quick.
Hundo is definitely coming in 2024.
It's coming. It's coming soon.
Can I also say for our video watchers, this was not planned that our wardrobe today, right? Like I came through with the Simpsons shirt, which by the way, Bart of Darkness original.
It is true. It is true.
And you came through with this epic Wolverine Weapon of X shirt, but it actually belongs to a band.
Yeah. So any music nerds, especially people that like heavier music, I'm looking at you, Shaggy Black. Entombed was a band, and they made music for years and years, but in the 90s they had a record called Wolverine Blues that had nothing to do with Wolverine, but people, including their label, really pushed them to do this like co-branding with Wolverine. And I guess they got it cleared by Marvel. I don't really know how all that works, but they had like imagery that included Wolverine. They had Wolverine clips in like a music video. They did all this stuff. So it kind of became synonymous with that record and with that band. And that was sort of a big thing in the 90s with a lot of bands, which is like a whole other episode we could do. But Entombed like has this like connection to Wolverine because of that record and that song. And so, for the rest of time, you'll see like merchandise for Entombed with Wolverine on it.
And
we're one of those things.
We're covering a lot of ground today.
Yeah, we
got coffee talk out the way.
I know.
We got heavy metal talk out the way. Is it heavy metal? Am I saying?
Yeah, no, it definitely is. It's definitely it's heavier metal.
Okay.
But that's the thing that's so interesting about, and that's why I make the joke about Pod Boys, because this is an episode, about the book, and it's about the project that I did. But it's also like when we get together sometimes, which we don't get to do as often anymore, it's kind of just an excuse to just kind of, talk about what's going on. And I think that's what's fun about coming on here, is sometimes they're very specific. Sometimes we're just hanging out. And I think you're going to learn something along the way.
That is well said. Well said. So I guess I should let any new listeners know, if they're expecting a very in-depth interview with Warren and his origin and all that stuff, you're not getting it. All right. Clearly, this dude has been on here way too many times, and I've listed every single episode. You can get that full context. But if you aren't following Warren on Instagram at Bart of Darkness, there will be a link in the show notes. Highly recommend you give him a follow, because he's got one of the best Instagram pages out there.
Thank you.
So with that said, Warren, let's go ahead and talk about this book, Collecting Simpsons. All right, let me get this name right, because it is a long ass name.
It is a long name.
Collecting the Simpsons, the merchandise and legacy of our favorite nuclear family.
Yes.
We got it on display here. And you've spoken. I know that you did a very interesting episode on Simpsons Greater Than, where you had your co-host interview you about the book.
Yeah.
I think it was a little self-centered, but it worked out pretty well.
I would like to say that was Brandon's idea. To anyone listening, that was Brandon's idea.
It was a good idea. I was like, damn, my man really named one of his episodes Warren Evans.
Hey,
yeah, it works, right?
Stick to the format.
It should have been Warren Evans, published author. I think that would have really set it off. But
True.
You've spoken probably ad nauseum about the book. I don't really want to have you regurgitate a lot of that, but I understand that we need to set the groundwork, the foundation. So, very obvious question here: how did the book come together? Who are your collaborators, and who is the publisher?
So this book, it's kind of funny because this is something, and when I've talked about this in the past, like, you know, people love to say like, oh, and this happened, and it was so serendipitous, and everything just fell into place. And it, you know, things rarely work out that way, but this is an instance where it actually did. And the reason I say that is because this is a project, you know, speaking of my podcast, I interviewed a man by the name of Robert W. Getz pretty early on in the show. I think he was like episode 47, maybe something like that, in the 40s. And the reason Robert is known among Simpsons collectors is he wrote these books about Simpsons collecting in the late 90s. And what they basically are is like collector guides, right? Like they kind of walk through the different eras of merchandise at that time, which was a very new thing. It shows you the different, you know, stuff from different countries, stuff from different companies, whatever, all this different stuff.
And this was like a first of its kind, right?
Yeah, there was like not a lot of stuff like this because the show was very new. Collecting it would have also been very new. You know, you're talking less than 10 years old at this point as far as like merchandise for the show. And, you know, to collectors, Robert's a really interesting guy because without those books, there's so many things that people would know about or that would sort of be lost to time. So he really did like a service for collectors when he made those. And I always like to give him his flowers because I feel like he doesn't get enough credit. And I say that to the point that when I interviewed him, he said no one had ever interviewed him.
Oh, wow.
So no one really ever cared enough to like get his story or understand how they came together. So, you know, I guess that's just a feather in my cap. But because I have such respect for what Robert did, I told myself, like, you know, someone else needs to do this sort of thing one day. And Robert even joked with me that, you know, he was clearly referring to me, but he's like, oh, somebody needs to do another book, you know? And so when I had that conversation with him, I was like, maybe that is something that I would love to do one day. Like, who knows how or when, or, you know, how I raise support for that, how I do it, whatever. So I knew I wanted to do it. Around that same time, maybe a year later, I interviewed Lydia from The Simpsons Theory on my podcast, and we kind of hit it off. We had a lot in common as far as our fandom and just like interest in like the granular details of, you know, The Simpsons in general, whether it be the show, the merchandise, whatever. And shortly after that interview, she reached out to me and was like, hey, you know, I should also mention she came on to promote a book. They had done a book previously. And she said, we were thinking about doing another book, but it's a book that we would really want to do with you. It'd be all about the merchandise and the history. Is that something you'd be interested in? And at that time, it's like, well, you know, it's like you're reading my mind, of course, because it's something I already like to do. So that project got kickstarted, and they already had a publisher because of their previous book, Mango Publishing out of Florida, Miami, Florida.
Oh,
and so they got me in touch with them. We pitched the idea to them. They loved the idea, and we started working on the book. So again, it's like one of these things that truly did just come together perfectly, magically, I guess.
And how long between you guys finalizing the contract to release? Because I mean, for me, you know, I kind of knew the behind the scenes stuff.
You kind of knew a long time ago.
Yeah, you gave me a lot of the inside scoop. But to the public, you just announced the book, I think this year, right?
Yeah, like a month ago.
Damn.
And that was sort of by choice. So I guess in all reality, we could have said a long time ago, like, hey, we're working on a book. But the thing about a book like this is there's so many moving parts. Like, I'm not writing it by myself. I'm writing it with two other people. We're dividing chapters amongst each other and like trying to decide who should write what and why. And then we're looking at each other's work, improving each other's work, working on everything together. And then you also have to think about the photos. You have to think about the length of the book. You have to think about, you know, production, like release date, all of these things come into play. So I just really wanted to keep it under wraps until we knew specifics. So in my mind, it's like, well, if I can't even tell someone when it comes out, then why would I announce it? So it was almost, in fact, I think it's a little over 2 years
Wow.
from the actual idea to announcement that we were working on this project sort of in secret.
And James and Lydia had already published a book about the Simpsons. It was the
Simpsons Secret.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it was sort of just like, it was a really cool book that explained like the phenomenon that many people, you know, sort of misunderstand about like Simpsons predictions. It's sort of just like, it's like poking fun at the idea that they predict things and sort of explaining how these things get misconstrued as predictions. It's a really fun book. Anyone listening to this is not like, you know, this is obviously supposed to be about this book, but I also recommend while you're buying mine, you also buy their last book. It's fun.
Come on,
It's really fun.
You can't say Warren don't look out for his collaborators.
Come on, you got to look out for your people.
So they already had gone through. They've already went through the process of making one book. So for them, this was sort of second. You know, they had some legs underneath them. This was completely brand new to you. What was maybe the biggest culture shock or learning curve for you?
You know, I didn't really know what to expect. So obviously doing this Instagram for almost 10 years, or I guess 10 years at this point, going on 11. Something like that. What is time, Botter? Who knows what time is? It's 10 years or so.
Okay.
And I've always, you know, I felt like I've been decent with words in my life. You know, like I can write a good caption. You know, I was decent with book reports in school. So I felt confident that I could put together a book because I know enough about this stuff, and I felt like I could sort of tell the story of this merchandise. But to me, the biggest shock and like the hardest part is the way you start to overthink every decision you make. So, you know, you would sit down for X amount of hours in a day, try to get so much ground covered in chapter whatever you're in, and you feel pretty good about it. You're like, oh, you know, that feels nice. I read back over that. I feel like I'm saying what I want to say. I feel like I'm getting somewhere. And then you could come back to that same thing the next day and think, what in the hell was I thinking when I wrote this? This sounds so dumb. So I think the biggest shock to me is just, you know, learning to, you know, it's kind of like podcasting in a way, like learning to not overanalyze every decision you make in a creative project will ultimately save you a lot of anxiety and stress, but it'll also, you know, make you less miserable as you work on a project. So I think to me, it was just like learning to let the work be the work and not always double back.
I thought that was interesting when you told me that you were going to be writing chapters, because I think originally, maybe the original scope or maybe how I interpreted it was that they were going to rely on your collection, which, you know, makes sense. You basically, I feel like you've got everything I could ever think of Simpsons wise. So I thought maybe they were just leveraging you for the collection, but when you were like, hey, I'm actually going to be writing chapters, I was like, damn, that's a really cool opportunity, like to be more involved, like directly involved with the book. I guess, could you speak a little bit about how the photos came together? Because, you know, your feed is really well curated. I think your eye for design, you've got a knack for design, an eye for design. You know, the feed is really well done, but you actually sought professional service for the photography. And right. I got to say, man, like, I mean, you know, your feed is good, your eye is good, but the photography in this book is another level. Like, it is beautiful, dude. The best way I could describe the photos in this book, and we'll flip through some of the pages. Actually, you know what? I'll flip through some of these early chapter pages here. But the way that the pictures showcase your collection, this is how I think a lot of people view their collection in their mind. Right. You know, right. It got me thinking, like, now Grant, I don't have everything set up the way I want it to, just for space wise, but the way I've got certain things curated, this is how I view. In my eyes, they look this good. And the fact that the photography you've got, the photos in this book really portray that. Like the lighting, you know, like you could, I think to an untrained eye, you see it and it's like, oh, that's a lot of stuff in this one photo. But I can tell from one collector to another, it's meticulous. Yeah, it's crazy. And I want to say real quick, my favorite thing about the video, to anyone watching the video, is that when Botter says things that like gas me up, you just can kind of see me like, all right, yeah, talk that. No, but so I have to give a huge shout out to the photographer, because not only is she incredibly talented, but she's also a dear friend of mine, Caroline Walker Evans. And when I first, you know,
saw this project finally getting to the point where I knew it was real, she's the first person I thought of. She's the first person I reached out to, and I said, "Hey, Caroline, I'm doing a book. I would love to involve you because I think what you do and what you've done professionally is like perfect for this book. Like your experience with product photography, your experience with portraits. I think all of that comes into play for how I visualize and how I see this book. And I couldn't have been more like, I will never forget. So Caroline lives in Seattle. We grew up in the same area. We're both from Mississippi. She's married to my best friend. Shout out to Daly. And so I've known Caroline for a very long time, but we live on opposite sides of the country. Like, you can fly to London in less time than you can fly to Seattle. It's far. It's fucking far away. So, when I talked to her about the actual project, I said, the only thing is you'll have to come here. Like, are you okay to come here and do it? So Caroline stayed with me for a week. And the moment she took the first photo, I was like, I could have done cartwheels. I was like, oh yeah, this is it.
Yeah.
Like, this is exactly what I wanted. This is exactly how I saw it in my brain. And, anyone can buy a nice camera and take pretty decent photos. But the thing that a professional and someone as talented as Caroline brings to the table that I have to highlight, because, Botter said that I'm pretty good at taking photos.
Because that's what really quick, let me jump in. I thought you were going to take all the photos. Because, I mean, for, all intents and purposes, they do look really good for the intents and purposes of like a social media.
Sure.
Feed. So when you were like, yo, I'm flying in, a friend of mine to Seattle, I was like, oh, this book is about to be epic.
Well, that's the thing is like, I think I'm okay at taking photos. And I'm very particular about how I want things to look for the page. And I feel like I have an eye for that in the sense that I know what I want.
Yeah.
But the thing about someone like Caroline, and this is the thing that I cannot, I can't stress how important this is when you're taking professional photos of toys. I mean, you're talking about a lot of plastic. You're talking about stuff that reflects a lot of light.
Contours and all that.
You need someone that really knows how to make that work, who knows how to, and Caroline would do the craziest shit. Like, she knows the tricks of the trade. Like, she would take a photo. I would go, oh, that looks great. And she'd be like, well, I don't really like this glare down here in the bottom right. So, can you stand right here with this umbrella? And I'm like, I mean, I guess so, And then she takes the photo again and she goes, okay, there we go. That's what I wanted. And I go and I look and it starts clicking with me. I'm like, holy shit, you got rid of all of those problems by knowing how to direct this, And this is really, I know this is like super deep, nerdy level stuff about photos, but it blew my mind to see someone with that skill set. Because again, you think, oh, well, someone has a nice enough camera. They set up a decent enough studio. They can take good photos. But there's so much more to it. And getting to work with someone like Caroline, I mean, I feel like it's made me better. Wow. Like, you talk about the Instagram feed, I feel like it makes my photos better now just from doing that.
That's fantastic. That's awesome. And we're going to show a lot of those examples of those awesome photos here in a second. But I've got just a couple more questions about the book, and we'll dive in. Or the process, the behind the scenes process. How are you going to celebrate? Actually, this is going maybe a little more fast forward, but where are you going to be December 5th when the book comes out? Now, granted, this episode drops the Wednesday after the book comes out. So we're doing a little bit of time travel here, but December 5th happens. I'm sorry. Where will you be December 5th when the book comes out?
This is like so boring and unexciting to say on the podcast, but because I didn't think about the day that it came out in terms of my normal schedule, I'll be selling records at Tiger Records.
I'll be at my day job.
Yeah. So I guess this is the shout out special. Shout out to Tiger Records. Yeah. If you want to see me on the release day and you live in Jacksonville, I'll be selling records there. Hopefully I'll have some copies of the book.
I guess I always imagine, like, if I should ever get to the point where I could drop a book or write my own comic book, I would, maybe to no one else, they'd show up to the shop like, what the fuck is this book? But I imagine myself being at the comic shop an hour before they open, knowing that there is no line, but I'm there an hour before they open. I've got fireworks and sprinklers. I'm probably setting up a little booth of my book. Like, you want me to sign that for you? You want me to sign that for you?
I mean, I will say, like, I'm definitely going to make some time to, like, go try to find the book before I go into Tiger. But at the same time, like, just knowing that it's going to be in the world on that day is enough for me. Like, I think in my mind, I was like, maybe we try to throw like a little party, or we try to do like a trivia, get like in my mind, I was like, maybe I try to set up this whole thing. But I think one of the things about what I do online and with Bart of Darkness that makes this, a little bit easier for me, and it's kind of special in that way, is that, the fact that I have an audience or people that actually care about what I work on makes me less concerned about that. Like I feel like I've kind of been celebrating it since I announced it, and that makes it a little bit easier. So, as much as I would have loved to plan some big thing, I'm just glad that it's going to be out in the world now.
That's cool. And if you could go back in time 2 years ago, as you're just getting started, and give yourself a piece of advice to make your life infinitely easier, what would you tell yourself?
I would tell myself,
like, run.
No. Well, so it's interesting with this book, because we took the photos first because we felt like we needed to understand visually the book before we could finish writing the words. So I think if I could do it all again, I would probably take the photos to the writing instead of write to the photos. But also I think, and this kind of goes for any creative project. Like you can apply this to a podcast, you can apply it to anything you're working on. Don't be so hard on yourself, because I think throughout the process of making anything, and especially this book, I would second guess some of the things that I was doing with the book. Like I would think, is that how I want to say that? Is that, am I covering enough stuff in this first chapter? Am I talking about enough of this or enough of that? So I think I would just be a little kinder to myself and stress less when it came to the overall, compiling of this information, because when you do something like this, you have to acknowledge early that you can't cover everything. Like that's if you go into it expecting too much of yourself, you're doomed to fail. So that's where I'm at.
I feel like that is so applicable to this recording.
I think it's applicable to life. I really do. I believe that fully.
That's fair. And how do you and I guess one more question for you, and then we'll get into the show and tell. How are Lydia and James feeling about the book?
I think we all, because we were so in tune with each other in this process, and we all felt so, how do I say this? I guess along the course of it, I feel like we were constantly syncing up our expectations. And what I mean by that is every time we were, unhappy with something or didn't like the way one part of it was panning out or whatever it may be, I feel like we were always on the same page. And while I'm giving love to Caroline, I also have to give a lot of love to James and Lydia, because we spent so much time on Zoom. And, we also spent a lot of time giving each other notes about our different parts of the book and all of these things. And if you think about that, especially when you're talking through a screen or you're talking through text or whatever, you can sort of butt heads. And fortunately for all of us, we usually agreed. Like all of their notes made my chapters better. I think my notes made their chapters better. I think we really found a creative click over the course of making this book. So, I think we all are equally relieved and excited that not only it's finished, but that we made sure we were happy with the finished product.
Well said, man. Well said. Can I also give a compliment to James? I don't know if you've ever looked at his Amazon author page, but my man is looking mad brolic. Have you ever seen it?
I have. And so,
I'm like, damn, did Warren team up with Clark Kent?
Shout out to James. We hung out in person late last year while we were in London, and my man clearly hits the gym. James takes care. He's, I aspire for his level of discipline. He takes care of himself.
Yeah, I love that. All right. Once again, the book is called Collecting the Simpsons, the Merchandise and Legacy of Our Favorite Nuclear Family. How about we go ahead and dive into the book?
Let's do it.
I guess we've been diving into the book the whole time, but let's get into the actual pages.
Let's do it.
And let's go and break it down a little bit, right? So we're scrolling through the page. We're past the we're scrolling through the book. We're past the kind of title pages. First of all, fantastic photo right here.
I love this
opening shot, and it's for our audio listeners. It's Warren's tattooed arm holding a what do you call these kind of signs?
A foam finger.
Foam finger.
Yeah.
Great way to just open it up.
It is great, and I will say I love this foam finger. It's
a Simpsons foam finger for the record.
But here's my problem with this foam finger And you all will notice this when you look at the book, because I trust that every single person listening is ordering it on Amazon right now. I trust that all of you are, because you care about Botter and you care about me. But this foam finger has 5 fingers. Like, you had one job when you made a foam finger for The Simpsons. Give them 4 fingers. Like, I don't know what design team, and I know it's sort of a traditional. I mean, it also has fingernails, which you see on The Simpsons. But you could have easily made this a Simpsons hand, and I just wish they had done that. But I still love it.
I mean, you loved it so much that you used it as like the opening photo. You know what I'm saying?
You know, when I got this foam finger, it was while we were working on the book, and I immediately saw that photo in my brain. That's not to be like dramatic, but I was like, I think this would be a great opening photo for the book, like next to, the contents or the introduction. So that is one of the first photos I had written down that I wanted to take.
Oh, like a what do they call that? Like a shot list?
A shot list. Nice. Yeah. That was on there. One of the first ones.
All right. One of my first questions comes down to this content page, because what I was not expecting, and I think this is safe to say with a lot of like coffee table books, and I own a few. They're not really books that you read, right? Like, you look at the pretty pictures, you might occasionally flip through it when you're having coffee or you got guests over. It's more like a statement piece.
Sure.
And what I enjoyed about this book was that it's definitely that. Like, it looks good. You can flip through it, just appreciate the pictures. But I was surprised by how many chapters are in this book, and how much exposition and write up is to this book. I was like thoroughly impressed and I guess it made sense the more I was like, oh, so that's why the process took so long. And, he was having all these sleepless nights because you really had to be an author.
Yeah. And what I will say that's, and this was big for myself, James, and Lydia. I talk about those Robert Getz books, and I recommend those to everyone that listens to this. They really, if you're interested in Simpsons collecting, they are the Bible. Like, there are things in that book that I wouldn't even know exist without those books. Wow. But the thing about his books is there's not a lot of writing. It's like 95% photos. And when we came up with this idea, we really wanted to toe that line. Like, we want this to be a book that you can look at and mostly just look at the photos and flip through and be like, oh, that's cool. That's cool. We wanted it to be a book you don't have to read, but we want there to also be this like added thing of, oh, well, if I do read it, I'm not only going to see the photos, but I'm going to learn about the things in the photos, and I'm going to get like some actual history about some of the controversy and some of the things that, is a big part of Simpsons merchandise. So I think finding a way to do both was like key to us. And I feel like we did that.
I would say this much. I learned a lot. Like, I'm not just saying that as a blanket statement, but I genuinely learned so much about the Simpsons. And truth be told, I've only gotten past chapter 5. So I'm about 150 pages in, which is a little less than half the book. The book is sitting at, I think, a little bit over north of 300 pages.
Yeah.
But it is taking me a long time to finish it because there is a lot to consume and read. But I'm enjoying the process because I'm learning a lot. So looking at some of the contents in the chapters in the book, you guys cover toys, obviously, clothing and fashion, home media, books, comics, fast food, food and drink, board games, video game, music, lost toys, the real Simpsons house, Universal Studios, and I'm assuming you probably wrote this last chapter 14, how to start a collection.
Yeah. And truth be told, how to start a collection is my favorite chapter in the book, just because, throughout the course of the book, and it's also important to mention that when we came up with all the chapters, like when we narrowed down like the things we wanted to talk about, we sort of had to divide them up in a way that made sense. So we sort of had to be like, okay, well, James and Lydia were like, well, you're the collector here. Obviously, a lot about the toys and like just the general merchandise. We really think that's your space. Like, you should really tackle that. That also is the longest chapter, I believe, is the toy chapter.
Okay.
Aside from maybe the video games, but that's long because we talk about every video game. It's like one of the only chapters where we actually do kind of talk about everything. So, we're dividing these up and we're trying to decide like who should say what. So by the time we got to the how to start a collection, it's also the last thing I wrote. And it just feels like it's the most from me and not just stories or history or information. So it's the one that's a little more personal to me. It's kind of, more from the heart, I guess.
Okay. And out of the, I guess we'll stick to 14 chapters, not including like introduction, foreword, and conclusion. How many of these chapters did you write?
I believe, I believe, and also we credit each chapter to who wrote it, but off the top of my, I'm pretty sure I wrote 5 of them by myself.
Okay.
And then of course, we helped each other with all of the other ones. So we sort of divided them amongst 3 people. Maybe I wrote 6 actually. It's hard to remember. You think that would just be like easy to remember, but a large chunk.
So you said that chapter 14, How to Start a Collection, is your favorite chapter that you wrote. What is your favorite chapter that you did not write?
I gotta give it to Lydia, and that is the clothing and fashion. And the reason I say that is, and I think James wrote some wonderful chapters for the book. No shade to James, but the clothing and fashion, whereas the toy chapter that the book starts on is like, here's some stuff, and then here's some more stuff, and then here's some more. It's sort of walking you through the timeline. When you get to the clothing and fashion, it's less of that and more so like when Simpsons became a merchandise property and when the clothing started coming out, there was a lot of controversy, and it really digs into like schools banning the shirts, President Bush openly complaining about the Simpsons and things like that. So it really digs into like something a lot bigger than just here are some cool shirts and here are some cool ties. And you get really cool photos of merch, but it digs into like a lot more. It talks about staff gifts. It talks about all of these like little things that, a collection book would miss, I think. So I like that it's sort of not what you expect, because you get all this sort of timeline stuff with toys and then you move into like, more of a history lesson.
And going back to what I said about, like genuinely learning some interesting lessons and facts about The Simpsons, the band Bart shirt, which I was not aware of its history or its, impact to pop culture. But the shirt right here that I've got on the screen, Bart Simpson, underachiever and proud of it, man. Wow.
Yeah.
Banned in schools.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess there was an attempt to ban it in schools.
Yeah.
Right?
And I mean, it's not only, the messaging is like,
which seems so tame now, right?
It does seem tame. But I mean, I guess you can, if you put yourself in the position of a parent in the early 90s, maybe you're less encouraged by like a cartoon character sort of glorifying your kid not trying. Like, and not to mention he's holding a slingshot at the person looking at the shirt. So it's kind of like, the shirt is very aggressive. If you think about it, it's like, I'm an underachiever. I don't give a shit. Why are you looking at me? I'll hit you with a slingshot. It's very like, it's a gripping shirt. And I think it's one of the coolest things about the show is that it had that edge when it came out. But, you can kind of understand why some parents who hadn't actually watched the show see this and they assume it's very bad for their kids' development. I'm not taking up for the parents, but I vividly remember being a kid and this era of their merchandise being very, sort of a hot topic.
It says here that these original band t-shirts from 1989 have only catapulted in value, and you could be looking to spend upwards of $150.
Absolutely.
That's still the case, huh?
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of this stuff, especially these early shirts, we all know how wild like the vintage market can be. Like that's across anything, sports memorabilia, anything. Like you'll pay a pretty penny for certain things. Like, Botter and I, obviously Jacksonville, big Jaguars fans. Some of that vintage Jaguar stuff, especially now that we're good. Any Titans fans listening, turn it off. Now that we're good, like you'll pay some big money for some of those things, and so especially with a show as iconic as The Simpsons, and because of sort of the controversy attached to some of those early designs, I mean, they were putting out shirts for, I mean, I guess not really for kids, but the kids were buying that said, "I'm Bart Simpson. Who the hell are you?" I mean, just when you think about the weight of that and the time it came out, like people want to own those. So they go for if they're clean, you can sell them for big bucks.
I almost foolishly asked if you had one. I'm like, this whole book is everything that he owns.
I sadly have too many, and I have several that are like have never been worn. I own several like dead stock original shirts, which is
well, let's talk about a size large. All right, we'll talk. All right, I'm kind of just scrolling quickly through this chapter is. Remind me again, this is the clothing, right?
Yeah, clothing and fashion. Yeah.
How is it awesome? Is it to I guess going through some of these pages, I've been in the room in your collection room several times, and even if I'm not in the room, you'll send me a text. I feel like I've been there when you've gotten like a lot of big pieces, but to see it displayed and proudly displayed in this book, like front and center, I think it just adds like another level of like, oh wow, he really got a signed hat by, Nancy Cartwright, fucking, and, I feel like we completely overlooked the fact that Yardley Smith, voice of Lisa Simpson, wrote you a very beautiful, I guess, what do you call that? Like
you would call it a blurb, but at the same time, her blurb was so much more than a blurb that it became like one of the first pages in the book. So that's really special. That Yardley was kind enough to not only say like, "Hey, this is great, you should buy it," but to like write, a paragraph really praising the whole project. I mean, it is crazy to see photos of my stuff because everything, nothing lasts forever. You know what I mean? Something could happen one day, and I could lose my collection, or my house could burn down, or you never know. And so the fact that my collection and this like time in my life is sort of, I don't know, it sort of exists now in this like book, like it for all, I guess for as long as the planet is here, is kind of special to me. It's like, sort of, it's encapsulated in this like protective little jacket forever. And I can still look at it if something were to ever happen. So that's a cool thing to think about. But in addition to that, and seeing, the support from people from the show, we didn't even talk about how Bill Morrison wrote the foreword for this book, which I'm here to be honest on the show. When Bill sent me the foreword and was like, "Hey, let me know what you think. Let me know if you like it." I mean, I almost shed a tear. I mean, it really is like it's so much more than I expected. He tells like a really personal story about his mom. It's fantastic. So, shout out to Bill, co-founder of Bongo Comics, guest on my show a couple of times, guest on the Short Box. Just a true legend in the Simpsons land, was nice enough to do the forward for the book. So it's just crazy to see all this stuff.
I was happy to see that his knack with words was just as impressive. He's just as talented with his words as his, like his pen game, drawing. I thought, same here. The opening foreword that he writes is very beautiful. And I think, it definitely goes to just like maybe some of the themes that we've talked about, just like believing in yourself, right?
Yeah.
I guess, and I'm getting kind of ahead, and I think I keep trying to encapsulate it all, but this book is such, aside from, like I said, it just being a beautiful looking book and, finding like merch that you probably have never seen and really getting into detail about your collection, the overall retrospective of the Simpsons and the celebration of like what it means, and like, you're kind of getting like a history lesson. There's no way that you guys wouldn't cover the show and its impact on pop culture and in the world. And it's done really well. I think at the end of the book, in the conclusion or the afterword, you guys, I think it was like a team effort, but you guys write, there's no denying that there are more qualified, there's no defying that there are those more qualified to write about the making of the show. So we felt it important to write a book from our own perspective, a consumer perspective, to focus on the Simpsons' cultural impact and how it affected merchandise.
Yeah.
And you still were able to weave in like the story of the Simpsons through that unique perspective. I thought that was like a really cool way to tackle, telling something new or giving a fresh perspective.
Well, to me too, it's interesting because, when this book was first conceived, I do think in my mind it was, more of a collector guide. Like my initial thought was like, okay, we're going to take a bunch of photos of my stuff. We're going to talk about all of that stuff. And then it's going to, sort of teach people about some of the stuff. What the book came to be, and this is what I think is so cool about it, is it's almost saying that collecting the Simpsons is more than just collecting the merchandise, because, we go into all this detail about the real Simpsons house, which gives you like this like crazy story of a giveaway the show did. We also talk about Universal Studios, which is, you can't collect Universal Studios, but so much merchandise has come from Universal Studios, and understanding like this part of the fandom is just another chapter to like, no pun intended, to collecting this thing. And so to me, I think it's cool that it's in my mind, it was a book about collecting, and it became more than that, but is somehow still also that.
Do you feel like there was a chapter that you could have easily doubled up on, or even just made a whole book about?
I fully think I could have made this book 3 times as long.
Wow.
And that was one thing that we talked about a lot, and a lot of things had to get cut. There's a lot of photos that didn't even make the book. To anyone listening that you know, if you're listening to this after you've seen the book, there's a lot of photos in it.
How many, real quick, how many photos in total, just rough ballpark estimate, you think the photographer took?
Easily 500 or 600 or 700. Like, there's no way it's less than that. Like, I mean, honestly,
I was expecting a lot more, but that's still a lot.
Truthfully, it could be 1,000 because there's so many photos of each thing to make sure you get the best possible one. Or like, you know, we would set up something and then take it one way and then move a couple things and take it another way and then decide which one was better. So, I mean, the true number is probably closer to 1,500 or something. But if I'm being just, you know, conservative, easily 600 or 700, 800 photos. But I say that to say there's so many that are not even in the book because we either ended up not having time to talk about it or it just didn't seem as relevant. Because again, and you'll see us say this throughout the book, we knew we couldn't cover everything. So we had to sort of dial it back and make it a little more broad. But if it were up to me, and who knows what the future holds, I would go into much more detail about a lot more things. Like I would talk more about international products than I was able to. I would talk even more about household products. I would talk even more about prototypes and samples. There's like always more to talk about. So, you know, look at this as like a broad walkthrough of just how big the merchandise is.
That's fair. And I'm going to stick to on this clothing chapter because I think this might be, aside from the comics chapter, which we might go into next, I think the clothing chapter is maybe my favorite one.
It's great.
Because of, you know, learning about like the Bart shirt controversy, which was like brand new to me. And I was really surprised, like, man, how have I never, you know, put two and two together or knew this? But the bootleg Bart, you know, little blurb or chapter in part was very eye-opening. Because I've seen, you know, I think we've all seen like the bootleg Bart shirts, especially like when, you know, they've got him as like Bart Sanchez or like they've got him with like the dreads and all that. I didn't know that there was that many subcultures and subgenres to it.
It's wild.
Oh, Black Bart. Yeah, obviously just Black Bart. I've seen so many Black Bart shirts, but I didn't know about like the this Bart versus Ram Barts, you know?
And there's so many. With again, like, you know, we talk about how much more we could say about each thing. Like we could do a whole book probably as long as this one just about the clothing. And that's a fact. Like, I mean, there's so many crazy. We didn't even really get to dig into like sports bootlegs. Oh, wow. Which is like one of my favorite things. And I wish that there would, you know, again, there's just not time to talk about every little thing. And that's, you know, that's the line that we had to walk. But I'm proud that we did, honestly, because
you got to put barriers up.
Yeah. And I think it gives people, you know, a broad idea and it teaches people a lot without, you know, if you get too granular, it's almost too much to take. For sure. You know?
All right. Question for you then. What is your favorite sub genre of Simpsons merch or your favorite bootleg?
So
I don't know, those go hand in hand, so you can answer them separately or together.
Favorite subgenre, you mean, is in like type of merchandise,
sure,
right?
Yeah.
So for me, and I've said this for as long as I can remember, whenever I get a question about like, you know, what do you look for specifically? I love all the weird ceramics and all the weird like stuff from Europe and Japan and France and just like all these like interesting international pieces, because one thing, and that's why I say I wish I could have spent more time on that, because there are so many amazing products that are not from America. And I would argue that in most cases, some of the more interesting products come from other places, Australia, Italy, France. Like some of the coolest stuff that we know about comes from other places and outside of America, which is where the show was created. So those are the things that really fire me up, especially, you know, like I said, the ceramics, the butter dishes, the salt and pepper shakers. I just think that stuff is such a window into a time, right? Like you don't really see these sort of products in this way anymore. And you don't really see shows merchandise the way Simpsons and things like it were, Star Wars, Ninja Turtles, etc. You just don't see this sort of phenomenon nearly as often. So those sort of things really kind of show you that the most. So those are the things that really grab me when I'm trying to find stuff. And as far as a bootleg, like to me, it is the sports ones, because I just love how bad some of them are. And I think that is like,
there's a charm to it.
There's a charm to that. And there's a charm to the idea that some guy was standing under the bridge on the way to the stadium being like, hey, get your Bart, 49er shirt, get your Bart Iowa Hawkeye shirt. Like there's something so cool about that. So those things always really fire me up.
Okay. Do you, I was going to ask, if you had the opportunity to go to another country, specifically to, dig and hunt for Simpsons merch that is native to that country, which country are you going to just for a Simpsons hunting spree?
I think it honestly is a tie, and I think it would be. I mean, I always talk about the stuff from France, but at the same time, like we know so much about that stuff because so many collectors do really like it, and there's it's not that vast of a thing because it's. I think most of the stuff that I know about, we all know about. I don't think there's any like hidden secrets there, but I think Japan and Australia would be two of the places where there's got to be so much stuff that we still don't know about. And there's so much stuff that's like, Australia, people, shout out to Four Finger Discount. I was on that show recently twice. And they are a testament to just how much people in Australia love The Simpsons. I would argue that people in Australia might love the show more than anyone. Like, it's honestly remarkable how strong their fan base is there. And the same can be said for the merchandise. They had their own style of merchandise. It's unlike any other merchandise in the world. It's just, it's truly so different. Like the types of things they made, the way the packaging looked, they always had the kids playing sports. It's just like so unique. So I think between those two places, there's got to be so many things that I could still uncover. So that's on my priority list for sure.
And and just for me to, I'm going to ask it this way, so that way I can cut a really good clip because that was a good ass answer. Which country has the best Simpsons merch? I'll go ahead and cut that.
Cool.
All right. Going back to this book, let me tell you another thing that was like profound. And I guess I got to give props to James since he wrote the home media chapter. But he makes a point in it. First of all, I have never. The way that the photos were shot for the VHSs, I have never wanted to just go out and buy a bunch of just physical fucking shows, buying them on physical. Like the VHSs, his chapter just made me appreciate the VHSs and the DVDs a lot.
Totally.
It got me thinking about like, my pops coming home with like a new movie that was a VHS and then, when DVDs started happening, like just how excited we were to like get this and then like hold it and we'd pass it around and all that. But he makes a comment about the I think he dedicates a good bit of it to DVD commentary, and he makes a remark, and I'm gonna butcher it, but he basically akins the DVD behind the scenes commentary to podcast before they were podcast.
Absolutely.
And reading that was like man, he's fucking right. Like why not what's better than having the source, the folks that worked on this show. And I wanted to hear from you. What is your favorite Simpsons DVD, just based solely on the commentary and the behind the scenes extra?
That's an interesting one. And I want to say before I answer that, talking about how much that photo of the VHS makes you want it, I just want to say another reason it's so perfect that Bill Morrison wrote the foreword is he did like all of that box art. Like,
wow.
I mean, he did tons of art throughout the book. I would argue like so much of what we talk about in the book was done by Bill. So much of the stuff in the toy chapter, so much of this stuff. I know those VHS sets, Bill did all of them. So I just want to throw that out. It's like, it's so fitting that he did the foreword. I was asked this question recently. About
who's asking you my questions? This is an old question. Dang, I thought I had something like new.
I mean, it is a good question, and what I was going to say is that when I was asked this originally, I couldn't really come up with anything, and it was actually Brandon who reminded me that the Who Shot Mr. Burns commentaries are like so good, and it's because they go into detail about how when that was all going on, they tried to like leak the answer. They tried to get like answers to the contest in like tabloids and stuff to try to stir up some controversy about the show. And even these like grimy tabloids were like, oh no, we don't want to spoil the show,
Oh, wow.
And
honor amongst these.
And so you learn like these crazy stories that you really wouldn't hear anywhere else. I guess you could hear them now on podcasts, now that everyone goes on podcasts. But like there was a time where this was the only place you were getting stories like this, especially from the writers, especially from the producers. So you can't really go wrong, but you want to go listen to those for sure. Who Shot Mr. Burns, a classic. Everyone loves those episodes. If you don't think they're in the top 10, you're watching the wrong show.
Do you think it's a shame that none of these, outside of just living on the DVDs, that none of these have been like digitized for I guess audio consumption. I mean, I guess is any of that out there?
It's sad that Disney has not done that. And what I will say is when they did Simpsons World, like when they used to have that website, this is like before Disney owned the Simpsons. This used to be like one of the ways you could stream it. It was through like FX.
Okay.
And there was a time where a lot of those commentaries were on there and you could listen to them. But no one has, and this is something I know a lot of people want, but maybe there's like some sort of weird crossover like contract issue with who owns the rights to those. I have no idea. Or maybe they don't want to have to pay more to the writers by featuring them on Disney. I have no idea what it is.
Yeah.
But I mean, putting them on Disney Plus seems like a no-brainer. Like, why not make the most of that? And why not record new ones for the seasons that are not on DVD? People want that kind of shit, especially for The Simpsons.
And I will say, you know, when you read this chapter and it talks about you know, the feedback and reception from the fans, you know, just from like the shift from VHS to DVDs, and then like the DVDs not being you know, uniform in shape and easy to display. I thought I got a good chuckle out of that because you guys go into like those nuanced things that maybe wouldn't mean anything to like the average person. You know, they don't really, you know, a bunch of nerds getting upset about the shape of a DVD box, but in the community, it's like it is a thing. You know, that's probably a thing that, you know, everyone talks about. Like it's maybe a joke at this point, but and I once again trying to encapsulate, you know, saying these big encapsulated statements, but the fact that you guys shine a spotlight and are able, I guess it's interesting that the Simpsons merch tells just as much about the history and story and the nuances of the show that even the show itself can't possibly tell.
This guy gets it. See, this Botter gets it. See, that is he just said in a way that I couldn't think to say. That is what the book is. Like it's showing you that the merchandise is more than just here's this, here's that, here's this. There's like stories and history that people have with these objects. Like it's more than just like, you know, people don't need a collector guide. They have Google. This is like reminding you of like a time in your life where you're like, oh, you know what? I remember getting that Homer shaped head and being really pissed off about it, you know, because you couldn't even stack it on the shelf. You had to lay it down or turn it on its side. And I just think being able to like unlock memories for people, like that's something I always talk about. That's like the whole point of my Instagram, being able to unlock a memory for someone, whether it be like a good one or like one that was locked far, far away, that connects to an object is fun. That's a cool thing to do. Like who doesn't love like, you know, finding lost memories? Does that make sense?
No, it does. And you won't hear a complaint from me. I want to kind of quickly move on because I don't want to go through the whole book and everyone's like, all right, I guess I got my book.
There you go.
But we also got another segment to do. And, but it wouldn't be right if we didn't touch on this is kind of a tie for my favorite chapter. Now, granted, like I said, I'm only halfway through. I'm sure this list will change, but I read the comic section last night, like really late at night. And I was like, maybe I could just skip this and, you know, read it in the morning. But I got so hooked into finishing this chapter. It was a long ass chapter for the record.
Yeah.
But man, and you know what? I've had you on the show to talk about Bongo Comics. I've spoken to Bill Morrison about it. And I still learned so much. And what I'll try to say about this chapter in general, the biggest takeaway that I got was just how integral comic books were to like the foundation and the start of the Simpsons.
Yeah.
Like going back as far as and I guess it really all starts with Matt Groening's what was the strip? Life is Hell?
Life is Hell. Yeah.
I did not know that started as a zine.
Life in Hell, Life is Hell. There's like they're called a lot of different things. There's School is Hell, Life is Hell. There's lots of things.
Like I knew that was like his first, you know, thing, like the thing that put him on the map, and then obviously, you know, crushed it with the Simpsons. But I guess I never really knew the in between, like the nuance, the connective tissue there, and the fact that you could really pinpoint it to Matt Groening. And this is something that we always talk about on the show, right? Like these stories of creators creating their thing, like this out of a passion. So he creates like the comic strip, puts it out via zine, and that gets his name. You know, that catches the attention of an executive, and they give him a shot at doing animated, you know, doing the bumpers for the Tracy Ullman show. It's like, damn, that all started with the fucking zine?
And what's even crazier about it?
Awesome.
And what's even crazier about it to me, and this is something that I feel like everyone knows, but people don't think about it enough, is they wanted to make a show out of Life is Hell. Like that's what they wanted. Like that's what Matt was there to pitch. And he was so precious about those rabbits. And this is, you know, the story goes. Who knows how, you know, I say this all the time, but who knows how true this really is? But this is the myth, is that he like doodled the family in the waiting room, you know, before the meeting. Was like, no, I think we should do a show about these guys. But Life is Hell is like, not only did he keep making it for a long time, but it was like very precious to him. Like I think he made it until 2015. So even while The Simpsons was like one of the biggest things in the world, he kept doing the strip. And you know, I will say that as someone who went back and didn't know about Life is Hell in the beginning, but someone who went back to it as an adult and really dug in, it's truly like you see the humor there. You see what the Simpsons became. You see the building blocks in those early strips, and they're dark, they're funny, they're you know, kind of sad sometimes. Like they're really introspective and fantastic in a way that I don't know if enough people have taken the time to go back and look, but they're really, really great.
And I guess that's what I'm trying to say is I went into it thinking that, oh yeah, I know about Life is Hell, the two rabbits. Kind of, I guess maybe I went into it thinking that was throwaway projects, or not throwaway, but like a side piece. And it's like, oh, The Simpsons is where I'm, you know, that's my bread and butter, that's my true love. Right. But reading this, it kind of pivoted that, where it's like, oh no, he was so protective about these rabbits. He was like, oh, let's do a show about these guys, you know, like kind of like a kind of, not, I won't say a bait and switch, because obviously it worked out well for him. But that to know that it all really started with a fucking zine.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of blew my mind.
Yeah.
And then really, you know, what this chapter does is really emphasizes the care, and I guess, and the love and the appreciation that the entire, I think I said to the entire like Simpsons team, but specifically like Matt Groening and Bill Morrison, like the love they put into the Bongo comics. Because admittedly, if I'm being real with you, growing up, I've definitely come across a few of these. And I remember thinking as a kid, like anything that was like a TV show comic, I kind of just always wrote off as like, you know, I just watched the show. But, you know, obviously meeting you and talking to Bill Morrison, I have a new sense of appreciation for that. But you read this chapter and you're like, nah, these guys were serious about making quality comics, like, you know, putting their love of comic books, you know, wearing that on their sleeves. And the amount of books, I didn't know that there was, you know, they started with so many titles like Radioactive Man, Bart, the Simpsons family comic. Am I missing one more?
Yeah, Treehouse of Horror, or like, you know, all of these Itchy and Scratchy. You know, they did so many little subgenres of comics. It's really wild. And you know, what you say is a great point, because you know, there's a big difference in, like, you know, people think about Matt's early beginning. You know, we talk about life in hell. I always say Life is Hell, because he did Love is Hell, School is Hell. And I think maybe some of them are called Life is Hell, but the first one was Life in Hell. Like that's the actual name. But when he was doing that, you know, people think of that and they're like, oh, he did this little comic strip. But you can tell when you look at those that Matt loved comic books. You can tell that there was like a profound love there, but he was just doing this little, you know, black and white strip. What he was able to do with Simpsons comics and before that Simpsons Illustrated is it was like his first shot to do something he had always wanted to do in a more real way. It's like, okay, I'm not just doing a zine or a comic strip. I'm going to do a real comic book. And the matchup of him and Bill Morrison and Stephen Cindy Vance and the whole team is such a magical thing, because people forget, and I'm sure a lot of people grew up with the comics, but they also, you know, maybe they never cared about them. Maybe they assumed they were just, you know, replicated versions of episodes or something. Who knows? Maybe people just looked over them. But when you realize that the comics went on for so long, like they were like a touchstone for some people. There's probably people out there that had stopped watching the show, but kept buying the comics. You know, you gotta think that that's possible. So the comics are like their own world. And like, again, you could do a whole book about the comics. So
yeah,
it's such a vast world within a vast world within a vast world. And that's like kind of the hard part about making a book like this, but also the fun part. You have so much stuff to talk about.
I think I got just a bigger respect for the Simpsons comics after, you know, this particular chapter, because not only did I really understand the role that, you know, Life in Hell or Life is Hell played into the whole creation of the Simpsons, but it also made me appreciate that this medium makes sense for the Simpsons, like to tell continued stories, and they weren't just trying to, you know, repeat the same stories that you know, plots and stories from the show. They had like full range to tell unique stories. And one in particular that, thanks to the book that it put on my radar, is this particular issue of Simpsons Comics number 13, where they tell, I guess the overall premise is Bart and Milhouse create their own comic called Oyster Man, and it's about what is it? It says they're shocked to find the same professionals stole their idea. Yeah, I guess a bunch of professionals call their idea stupid, only to steal the idea, make millions off it, and it's kind of a commentary on the comic book industry. And you're like, wow. So obviously, the folks writing the books and this particular story are very well aware of the industry and are making commentary about it.
Yeah, and the fact that they were able to do something like that, like with, you know, a property like The Simpsons, that's like part of what makes this so amazing. And we did a whole episode about Radioactive Man once, and we've talked so much about that. But what they were able to do was so many different things, like give us commentary on the industry, but also make fun of the tropes, but also expand what the show was doing. You know, keep those characters true to the show. Like all these little things, they took such care. And that is why the comics mean more to me now than even when I was younger, because now I like see just how much time and work went into those comics. And something I've also said thousands of times is you're not going to see The Simpsons look better than in some of these drawings. Like, so the comics are like one of the most fun places to look at these images. I have so much love and appreciation for the comics, more so now than ever.
You've been trying to, I mean, you've always kind of drilled into my head, B, you got to check out the Treehouse of Horror series. You know, they've got some of the biggest names in comics doing them. You've shown me plenty of examples. I think, you know, I've championed it once or twice when you were on the show, but having it really broken down here where, you know, they're showing all, I didn't know, first of all, I should have listened to you when the omnibus came out.
Oh, yeah.
Because if this is all in the omnibus,
it is
the Treehouse of Horror omnibus.
It is.
I'm copping like immediately.
Yeah.
You know, like these covers are beautiful, and then you really get to see. Because I guess the whole premise is like with the Treehouse of Horror books, they were inviting other comic creators, you know, big name, you know, rising, you know, even manga stars to do their own interpretation. And just a couple of preview pages, which I've got on the screen, of The Simpsons in different art style. You know, like this manga art style blows my mind.
Yes.
Like I'm so interested now to try to like go through all of it and see who else has done their interpretation. I know like Bernie Wrightson has done a Simpsons story. This one right here, what is it? Issue 1, Bart Simpson's Treehouse of Horror. I mean, off the rip, these are some comic book legends. Mike Allred, James Robinson, Jeff Smith.
I know.
Crazy.
It's insane that they did that. And I think, you know, something I know Bill's talked about a lot is that, you know, he was afraid like Matt Groening wouldn't love this idea of like letting them go so crazy and invite another artist. But Matt was all about it and he loved it. And that's like the most, I think the Treehouse comics especially are like, you know, if you don't want to dive in and have to collect hundreds and hundreds of comics, at least get the Treehouse ones, because you'll never see the show look so crazy. So many of the covers were like actual paintings that Bill Morrison did, and they're among my favorite Simpsons things that exist. You know, we're looking at it right now, Treehouse 14 up there in the top right corner. That's like such an unbelievable cover.
You will definitely put a newfound respect on Bill Morrison's name.
Absolutely.
This man is stupid talented.
So good.
And I've had a chance to see him a few times, like at conventions in the middle of drawing a sketch or doing a remark on a Funko Pop. I think one time I even caught him like actually painting. And it's like, yo, people don't mention your name enough.
And you know, and something else about him that I anytime Bill Morrison comes up, and this is not just because he wrote the forward for my book, I love Bill so much. He like, I always feel the need to remind people like he's still doing it. Like, you know, anyone listening that bought the Super 7 reaction figures, like Bill did a lot of those card arts. Like he's still to this day like one of the best people drawing Simpsons, if not the best. Like no shade to anyone, no shade to Wes Archer, no shade to David Silverman, no shade to Matt Groening, but Bill is like, you know, what I associate the most with The Simpsons is so many of those early card arts, so many of the early advertisements, all of that sort of thing. And that's all Bill. So, you know, part of the reason we see the show the way we do and the characters the way we do in a physical space is because of Bill. So I just, you know, I always had to put that extra respect on.
All right. Last but not least, because like I said, I didn't go any further than this chapter, and I think this is a good drop-off point. But I feel like you've definitely mentioned the Futurama crossover comic book.
Yeah.
Did not know it was done twice.
Yeah.
Are they that good?
They're really,
how do you feel about
they're
it?
really, really good. And I, you know, this is one that I'm always saying I want to like reread because it's been a while. But like I mean, just look at those covers, man.
No, the covers
they're
are
crazy.
stupid nice.
And you know, this happened way before the show. The show actually did a crossover of Futurama a couple years ago. And you know, to some people that was such a radical idea.
By like a wide margin. So sorry to interrupt. I was surprised to know that the crossover happened in the comic book 2005, but they didn't actually do the TV crossover until 2014.
Yeah. Damn. Yeah. So the fact that they, you know, they were doing these sort of, you know, when that episode of the show came out, some people were like, whoa, that's crazy. I never thought they would do that. And it's like, well, they actually, they've done this stuff before in the comics, and that's why it's so cool. And obviously it's a completely different type of story. But you know, it's so cool to see these two properties like come together. The crossovers are great.
I was gonna fuck with you and be like, Warren, you got to say something nice about the Family Guy crossover, but I know you refuse to say anything nice about Family Guy.
No comment.
Oh man, I'm telling you, one day I want to see a crossover of Simpsons Greater Than and whatever the biggest Family Guy podcast is.
I don't know if there's a big Family Guy podcast, but I'm willing to bet anyone who hosts that podcast is not someone I would talk to. You know, no, listen, you know, this is a joke I make on my show a lot, and I always like go on this whole thing when Family Guy comes up. When Family Guy first came out, I did not hate it, but my argument is always that it's aged so poorly and only ages worse and worse as it gets older. You know, I have no like beef with people who like the show. But you know, anytime there's like a problem with the Simpsons, like, or someone gets mad about something that happens in like a new Simpsons, people are always like, well, this is why I watch Family Guy. And this is something that Brandon and I talked about recently. To me, that's like, when I see stuff like that, I'm like, that's all I needed to know about you. I'm good.
One day I'm going to invite you on the podcast. I'm going to surprise you with I'm going to have a psychologist with me. And we're going to get to the root of this problem.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So that brings us to the end of that comic chapter. Warren, very quickly, I'm going to give you the option to bring up maybe one chapter we can quickly scroll through. That is whatever chapter you want to go through.
I would say like maybe go through the real Simpsons house. And the reason I say that,
you go ahead and set it up. I'll find it.
The reason I say that is we're talking a lot about, you know, merchandise. And when Lydia first, you know, talked about making a chapter about the real Simpsons house, in my mind, you know, that didn't make a ton of sense for like what this book was about. But if you think about it, like there is no like greater, you know, grail piece to any collector than this like lost opportunity to own the Simpsons house. And the reason I say that is it's one of the most interesting stories in the world of the Simpsons.
Are these floor plans?
Yeah. I mean, they built a real house.
Oh, okay. It's related to that. Gotcha.
Yeah. So like knowing that this existed and knowing that like none of us really ever got to appreciate it because of the whole story, which I won't spoil the story. Anyone that doesn't know it should go read the chapter. But, you know, this is like, while this is not something you can physically collect, this is like, you know, this is like it's like the ultimate personification. It's like the ultimate personification of like a physical thing from the show. And so it's something that people need to know about. Like any collector needs to at least know this story, or at the very least, you know, go visit the house now. So what I will tell you is that the house, you can't go inside of it. Someone lives in it and it no longer looks like the Simpsons house, but there is one little thing about it that is special. And what that is to this day, there's a piece of concrete in the front of the house. And if you scroll a little further, Botter, you'll see it the other way.
Oh, sorry.
That is still there to this day. That little concrete slab with Homer drawn in it. I think you just scrolled, but there you go. That is still there to this day. So if you go find the house in Nevada, that little concrete slab is still on the walkway to the front door.
Wow.
Matt drew that in the slab the day that they like, you know, officially like unveiled the house or whatever. So there's just something really interesting about, and this is like also a time where the show didn't have tons of merchandise. So it is sort of relevant to what the merchandise would become for the show, because people believe that this was like an attempt to sort of drum up interest in the show again and like get people really engaged and, you know, keep people engaged in the show. That's something that every big property has to do.
For sure.
So in that way, it is very relevant to the merchandise to me.
Man, talk about a PR stint.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
No, this is epic.
And, you know, not to Monday morning quarterback on the whole team, but like I've said this a million times, why didn't you just do a contest to where the winner would get the house built for them instead of building the house first? I'll never understand Because the whole thing is, the person didn't want to have to move to own the house that won the contest. So they could have solved all that
by building it,
building it after the fact. But hey, you know what do I know? I'm just a Simpsons historian.
No. You're a published author that knows a lot. And I think with that said, Warren, I think we've given, if the goal was to give people a preview of the book, I think we've exceeded that.
I think so.
I want to say the book, once again, is available by the time this episode comes out. If you're a Patreon subscriber, you got a couple of days before it comes out, but it is available on pre-order on anywhere you get your book, you get your
Amazon,
books.
Target, Walmart, Barnes and Noble. You can order it directly from the publisher if you want. You got lots of options. You can find lots of options either in the description of this episode or in my bio on Bart of Darkness. So go to my link tree.
And you know what? Before we move on to the next segment, I guess we should go ahead and announce the contest to win a copy of the book.
Yeah.
Which we did not discuss prior at all.
We did not. So let's just figure it out right now.
We're gonna figure it out right now. All right. So we're gonna open this.
This is classic Pod Boys right here. This is Pod Boys.
We can make this
flying by the seat of our pants.
It's two. Like we had a published author and a professional podcaster. We can, we can make something happen.
Yeah, we can figure it out.
So the contest will be open to anyone in the U.S. because the international shipping does not play around.
I like that.
So we're just going to keep it to U.S. residents only, U.S. resident listeners only, and let's make it simple. You tell me as a listener, email me or even DM me on Instagram or Twitter, and tell me what is your top 3 favorite Simpsons episodes.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna let Warren decide on the winner since he's a professional. All right. So
I like it.
Give me your top 3 Simpsons episodes. We'll probably randomly pick one, or depending on if you got a compelling list that impresses Warren.
If you really bring the heat and you want to give us like an extra little description as to why these episodes are special to you,
I like that.
Tell us why they're special to you. Then maybe you get like let's say we decide to make it random. If you give us a nice description, we'll give you extra entries. How about that?
Okay, that's gonna be a little hard to track, but not bad, not bad. Let's just go ahead and have people send in the list with a little bit of a justification, and we'll go from there. Either we'll do it randomly or whatever one that you're like, damn.
Well, let's just go ahead and assume that the extra justification wins you something. So just go ahead and do that for us.
Oh man, this is such a short box giveaway. I love it. All right, we'll do that. I'll take care of the shipping and the handling. And you're gonna enjoy this book. And even if you don't end up winning the book, support my man Warren, support James and Lydia Hicks. I mean, the book is fantastic. A lot of love went to it, as you can tell.
Thank you.
Warren, do you want to stay on and we can hop over to Patreon? Record a little longer.
Let's do it, baby.
Record a little bonus episode for the patrons and the diehard supporters. We'll do champion season. I got like 2 emails I'd like to catch up on. We'll just nerd out for a little longer.
Yeah, very cool. I guess I can do that.
What's interesting is that you're paying for that content yourself because you're a patron of the show.
There you go.
So, you're in a weird way, like it's the snake eating itself.
It's true.
So if you're a listener and if you want to hear that conversation, or if you just want VIP treatment, if you want to be treated like VIP and you get extra perks and bonus episodes and early access to the podcast and all the other great things that our patrons get to enjoy, please consider heading over to patreon.com/theshortbox. Become a patron. We got tiers for all bank accounts, for all budgets. It's cheap. All right. I'm going to be honest with you. It's affordable and absolutely worth it. And it would mean a whole lot to us to have your support. Besides that, I'm going to try to have an episode for you guys next week. I just got to figure out some scheduling, but I'm sure we'll have something for you. Please come back next week. And as always, please continue to make mine and your short box. You guys are fantastic. Be well, take care, and I'll see you next week, right? Peace.